Test one, two. Test one, two. Alrighty. Good evening, everybody. It is 11 p.m. That means it's time for the Game Master Soapbox. I am your host, Jonathan Albin, Game Master J, and I've got my traditional list here. I say traditional because we've been doing it for just over 2 weeks, so yay! Anyway, I wanted to cover a bunch of topics as usual and want to get those covered as concisely as possible. The first thing we're going to talk about are the 4 ways to track resources in the game that make the game fun instead of a drudge. We'll get more to that in a minute. How to use quantum die rolling in RPGs other than NycosRPG, because the quantum die mechanism is actually, in many cases, intrinsic. It just doesn't seem like it, and there's not anything about it called out, so we'll talk about that in a minute. We also want to talk about in-game wealth and internal game economies and how they are similar and but also different. We also want to take a quick look at 3 steps to better sessions overall, because who doesn't want a better session than what they're playing right now? I mean, every game is fantastic and marvelous, but every game could always be better. So today's rant is on the 7 signs of a poor sport. And it's funny that I mentioned sports after my commentary last week about the very aspect of being a sportsman compared to being a game player, but I digress. Then finally, we're going to talk about the real secret to happiness, and that's the hidden gem for today. It really isn't a games reference topic, but it's something that I've discovered, and I want to make sure I share with everybody, so make sure you stick around to the end to learn really what the secret is to happiness, because there's a lot of people that won't tell you, and even if they do tell you, you won't believe them. So, alrighty. So, as is always my case, I'm going to talk about the first one first and the second one second. I intend to follow a bit of a thread through, and I think you'll see how that works here in a minute. But first of all, we're going to talk about the 4 ways to track resources in game. And what I'm talking about when I'm referring to resources are those things that are expendable in the game economy, in the player experience, and in the game sessions. And let me first preface this by saying that almost nobody actually tracks resources. And I am speaking from a position of authority only because I've been playing and administering and experiencing role-playing games for just short of 50 years. And in all of that time, I can only remember a handful of game sessions where the resources meant something to the level where if you weren't tracking them properly, you would have challenges or problems in the game. And there are a myriad of reasons why, but the 4 ways that you can track are not necessarily the 4 reasons you would want to. So let me first say that the only reason to want to track resources in a game session would be specifically because you intend to run the players out of that resource for some reason. And perhaps that is just to make them aware of the value of said resource. Maybe it's to catch somebody who has been intentionally mistreating the resource mechanism. Maybe it's for some other reason, but the fundamental cause for tracking from a game master standpoint, and I'm perhaps revealing behind the curtain a little bit, but the only reason that I track resources is that I intend to limit them out at some point for either an object lesson or as a way of showing the gravity of the game session by putting them at risk for that one subject. So this is one of the reasons in motion pictures you'll see them cut off the air supply in a science fiction movie, or they'll restrict the water access in a fantasy setting or whatever, because what they're wanting to do is show the gravity of the situation in ways that anybody can understand, even if they aren't in that environment. I mean, if I thought of being on board a starship and running out of oxygen, that would be of a very great concern to me, and is probably one of the greatest reasons why people don't want to go to space or travel around in the deep seas, is because both of those are places where you can relatively quickly run out of something that you must have to live. So beyond that, let's say you're only wanting to track it for prurient interests. You're wanting to, the comedy of a archer who has forgotten to keep track and has lost all of his arrows, or a juggler who also is a card player and may lose cards during one of his juggling stints. That kind of silliness might require you to track individual resources. Or perhaps they are traveling into a dark cavern and they require sources of light, so they could relatively quickly end up in complete darkness if you weren't, or if you were rather stringently tracking their resources. So there's 4 ways that I have experienced that tend to work, and probably a dozen that don't. But one of the easiest way of working it is to audibly call out the beginning of a turn and the amount of time that is ticked off, and make sure that the players follow suit on tracking the number of ticks on a sheet for their torches or whatever. I've done it myself where I've actually used and this goes to perhaps the second one, and that is to use a countdown die. Some 20-sided dice are made so that as you roll them from one side to the other, the dice numbers automatically move down from 28 to 19 to 18 to 17. Now, these are not dice that are considered to be legitimate dice, because the opposite sides don't add up to the value of the dice plus 1. Like, for example, if you're rolling I'm losing my voice here. I don't know why. For example, on a 6-sided dice, each of the 2 sides that are opposite each other add up to 7. So any 2 sides of a 20-sided dice should add up, and the opposite side should add up to 21. And that's just the numeric mathematics of dice. So one way is therefore to roll down a countdown dice, 20 and then 19 and then 18 and so on. And that's a much more physical way, but it's also a way that can be mucked up pretty easily by bumping the dice or forgetting about it, and pretty soon you don't know whether you should take 2 ticks or 4 ticks off the counter because you don't remember how many rounds you've been since then. But so the first way is to call it out, and to call it out is an audible way, and ultimately it's scene breaking. It's interfering with what's going on in the game. It's making you think about some mechanical parameter of the game and not the experience of the game itself. So it's not a good one, but it is one way. The second way is to use a countdown die so the numbers can be seen ticking down. A third way is to have tally marks or hash marks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then know how many of whatever it is you're counting down. If it's 20 arrows, then if you have 7 ticks, then you have 13 arrows left. It's not difficult math, but it's still a way to track them. And a fourth way to track them is to have some physical thing that is an analog to that which you are counting down. For example, in one of my game sessions, I took a container of toothpicks, and I mounted little tiny paper fleshings on 20 of them. And so I would hand that packet of 20 toothpicks, and each time they made a shot, they had to give me one. And if they didn't remember to ask, the pool of toothpicks that I had collected for that combat would go back into my pool, and the number that they could have would be only what they remembered to have. So it forces them to think about them in a different way, but it also forces them to think of them in a tangible way so they feel the absence of them. So that's a short little snippet, but those 4 ways are the quickest ones to track, and I'll repeat them really quickly. Number 1 is to call it out every round. Not optimal, kind of annoying, sometimes frustrating, but it works. Second way is to use a countdown die or other numerical symbolic way so you see the number getting smaller and smaller. Third way is by hash marks or tally marks, and the tally marks provide a way to keep track by simple subtraction where you really are versus what you claim you have. And then finally, the fourth way is to provide a physical analog to the thing that's being counted and then track those. So, for example, matchsticks for torches. You physically have a matchstick that's more than likely not been struck, but the matchstick represents the torch, and when it gets used up, you break the toothpick, break the matchstick. The idea is that you have something physical that equates to the thing you're trying to track, and it makes it a lot simpler to follow and maintain and keep an eye on during game in a way that will actually make the countdown useful, because, as I said, most game masters don't track any of that nonsense because it's just simply too much detail work and not in the scope or even the emotional status of a role-playing game to do so. All right, we're going to talk about how to use the Nikos quantum die rolling system in any RPG. And that's a rather bold statement, I suppose. But many game systems already have this, they just don't acknowledge it. For example, Dungeons and Dragons, the skills-based system that they utilize, granted it has a very limited amount of skills, and my argument would be, of course, to just expand and use the entire Nikos list, and then you can literally saddle it over the top of D&D as it is and not have to change much. But if you do, just realize that it's already, the mechanism for quantum die rolling is already there. If you look at the description of how skills work, skills tests in the mind of a game master have a multitude of levels to determine the threshold for success. So they have very easy, and they have easy, and then they've got moderate or medium, and then they've got difficult, and they've got very difficult. And these 5 mechanisms, these 5 things are all set individually as success failure threshold. So something that is easy takes a really low threshold, like a 5 or better on a D20, which means the majority of the time you're going to succeed, especially if those skills have any modifiers to them. And most players, if they are using a skill, are more than likely using one that they've got a modifier for, because that's the way D&D players think. You've got to have a modifier for a number to have any value. You must have a justification for having a skill for that skill to exist. So, but notice, an easy number, a medium number, a difficult number, and an impossible number. Well, that pretty much equates to the attribute levels of the quantum die rolling system. Now, D&D's mechanism has it at, I believe, 5 points per. So an easy task is at a 5 or better, a medium task is at a 10, a hard problem is at a 15, and the impossible is on a 20 only. Well, isn't that exactly what the quantum die rolling system does? You have a failure, a partial success, a complete success, a wild success, and a perfect success. Well, those 5 equate. And so all you need to do is have the player roll the skill check and then do a comparative with the skill check with what level of degree of difficulty they've achieved, and that will give you the amount of information they should be provided. So, for example, if it is an easy test to know that the person walking down the street is a cleric, is a priest, okay, that's an easy test, 5 or better. Perhaps that was not what you wanted to test. You wanted to test whether or not you could tell his faith community. So you make that a medium test. So that'd be a 10. Then you say, well, okay, but I'm going to go on to talk about his specific sect of his faith. And so that you make that a 15. And then finally at the top you can say, no, I want to know who his high priest is. Well, that would be on a 20. So you've got the same mechanism. It's just that the mechanism is not easily transmissible in mental terms. With the percentage dice system and the Nykos mechanism, it's easy to go double up or double down on just about any number. It's easy to do times 2 or divided by 2. Not a difficult math problem. And the other 3 spaces, which is abject failure, that's anything above, and perfect success is the exact 0, 1 at the bottom. So you've got both of the outside parameters, and the other 3 are standard double up and double down. You're done. You've got it all. In a D&D environment, it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 20 5, 10, 15, 20 are the dividing lines. So it's the same. And so therefore, now that you know that, now you can actually build your adventure equations so that instead of giving only a singular answer, you as a storyteller can now amplify, because if they only get a base success, then they only get this number. If they make a better than base success, then they get this much more information. And if they make a wild success or they roll a perfect number, then they get all the information. So it's a way to resolve those kind of challenges in a quick way, but it automatically amplifies your play experience. And I highly advocate that if you're not yet familiar with the NycosRPG system or using the quantum die rolling specifically, at least use that mechanism so that your play is more rich. There's more options. There's more depth to the solutions of things. While we're at it, I do want to mention that the quantum die rolling system is used in the Dark Shards RPG, which is available currently through Board Game Paradise. That's the logo right down here in the corner. Board Game Paradise is a full-service game store in Redlands, California. They're open 7 days a week, and they cover every kind of genre of game imaginable, and a few things that wouldn't even qualify as a specific game. For example, they have a lot of puzzles. They have murder mystery party kits. They have lots of stuff. So definitely want to check that out if you're in the local area here. If you're not in the local area, they do have a website, boardgameparadise.com. They have a Facebook page. You can also contact myself through NycosRPG.com to get information on the store. And also realize that you can order the NycosRPG game Dark Shards, the first of the full versions of the books, available via PDF at NycosRPG.com. And also find there a place to download a PDF of the character sheet. So lots of resources there, and everything has to do with the Board Game Paradise, which is our associate there. So now, before I move on, the quantum die rolling mechanism is exclusive to the NycosRPG only because the NycosRPG mechanism is built around it. So once you familiarize yourself with the quantum die rolling, feel free to use it. I just want everyone to use it. I want people to know where it came from. So it's Jonathan Albin and the NycosRPG. There we go. So Now we're going to move up to in-game wealth and game economies. A couple of weeks ago, one of my rants was the players who somehow feel poor or unprepared because they don't feel like they have enough magic or enough money. And this leads, therefore, to this discussion, and that is what is considered to be wealth within your game campaign. Does in-game wealth equate to fiscal prosperity? Does it equal hoarding of large amounts of a resource or 2 or 10? Is it something that translates to a better style of life, better scale of life, better living conditions, living location? Is wealth really wealth, or is wealth a number on a piece of paper that tracks success failure by some kind of win condition? In the classic Dungeons and Dragons model, the economy is not described in terms of purchase power. It's not in terms of land ownership. It's not in terms of even money changing. And all of these things are definitely part and parcel to a fictional fantasy setting, just as much as they are in the real setting, because simple things like what does a gold piece weigh? And does it weigh the same thing if you go from one country to another? And is the gold the same purity? And if the gold's not the same purity, how can you tell a gold piece from an electrum piece? You know, if a gold piece is intended to be broken into pieces because of the relative flexibility of the metal, then why, what is a piece of a gold coin worth? And can it be traded again? And what happens to somebody who melts down their gold and forms it into ingots or blocks? Is that more valuable or less? These are all numeric values that don't have much to do with gameplay at all. And that's not even what we're talking about when we speak of game economics, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But just realize that if you're going to be a storyteller and you want to convey a convincing tale, you have to have an understanding what it is to be wealthy. Does that mean you have 100 gold pieces? Does it mean you have 10,000? Does it mean you have 1,000,000? And if you have 1,000,000, where are you storing them? And what condition are they stored in? And how do you know how many of them are pure? Did you actually do a purification test on every coin? Or do you have a certain number of your coins that are actually electrum and therefore worth 1/10 of the value? These are all questions that need to come up when you're dealing with in-game wealth. But this is not game economics. And game economics is what is the throughput of coins in your game's system. For example, Nykos is infamous for players being penny rich and pound foolish, or penny poor and richness foolish. A player can have a lot of things, can have a lot of resources that don't have a numeric fungible value, and fungible means literally expendable. If I have 4 slaughtered conies and I'm about to fix a meal, I'm rich in food. But if I'm sharing those conies with other people and trying to get revenue from them, they may or may not be willing to pay what they might seemingly be worth otherwise. So game economics has to do with the throughput of coins. And if your game mechanism literally has a space on a character sheet where the characters are tracking their gold pieces in hundreds and even thousands of coins, you are doing it wrong. The economies that require a gold piece to operate would be so affluent, so materially rich, as to make
coins themselves irrelevant because the stuff you're trading for would also be of equivalent value. So why would a blacksmith who, makes horseshoes for horses and charges according to, a book or someplace or whatever, that he's charging 3 gold pieces for that work? Well, couldn't he just trade that 3 gold pieces worth of work for a week's worth of groceries, or 2 weeks worth of groceries, or a month's worth of new iron? I mean, there's all kinds of ways that an economy can be busted up and broken by leverage. And so in the world of Nikos, stuff is cheap. You can have tons and tons and tons of stuff. And I mean tons. You could actually have wagon loads of your belongings. But those are not expressible in economic terms because they are pound for pound so much less valuable. For example, in the NycosRPG universe, when it comes to purchasing stuff, 100 copper pieces are required to make a silver piece. 100 silver pieces are used to make a gold. 100 gold are equivalent to a crown. 100 crowns are equal to a platinum. 100 gold make a platinum. 100 platinum make a crown. 100 crowns make a dragon. Therefore, a dragon is worth 1,000,000 gold pieces. And we have players who are walking around with 1 or 2 or 7 of those in a shoe someplace because they've gathered them over time and literally can't spend them because the resources that they're trying to buy and sell are literally only worth what it would take to, polish a sword for an hour. That would be worth the same as a full meal or whatever. So trying to divorce in-game wealth with game economics is rather important, because if you're making your players ultimately wealthy by giving them plenty of resources, even lands and titles, these things don't have a transmissible value, and so your game economies need to take that into account, or else you're going to get really confused. I had a situation where, based on that, the math, if you have 1 gold piece, it's worth 400 years of life. You could live on bread and water as a subsistence life for a long, long time. And so, since gold is geometrically more valuable than 1 gold piece would be such that if you drop that in a certain low-end bar, you might actually own the bar, because the barkeep would take that 1 gold piece and say, I've made the big time, I'm out of here. So with that realization, you need to be sensible about what you're doing for your game economies to make sure they're not being corrupted by your own game wealth. I've had players who actually had as their play agenda to break a local economy, that their purpose was to dump all of their coins into a little 3-horse town and end up owning the police department and the justice of the peace and the licensing bureau, etc., etc., etc. It just got silly. But that kind of a game dynamic can only come if you're aware of it, and piling on the 1,000 gold pieces into a character's personal experience materials pool is foolhardy, because it doesn't do what you're going to want to do, which is keep them inside of the economy. Alrighty. Now we get to the fun stuff. We're going to go right to the 3 steps for better sessions. And now if you're just joining the show for the first time, you'll find that I don't do this kind of clickbaity titles very often. But the reality is that there are 3 steps to making a game session better, and we're going to talk about every single one of them. And so make sure you're taking notes, because I think these 3 will really help your sessions work out. The first one first of the 3 steps to a better session is make sure that you hold it consistently. Hold it every time you say you're going to hold it. The door has to be open and the lights on. There has to be a session, because one of the worst killers of game sessions is instability. Because if a player misses a week, shame on them. If they miss 2 weeks, then shame on us. And 3 weeks, the system's pretty much gone, because by that time, nobody else is holding either as well. So the first step, therefore, is to make sure that you host on the days that you're going to host every time, and that you're always there and Johnny on the spot, ready to go. Because the worst thing that can happen to a game master is to be seen as incredible. I know that sounds funny. I am an incredible game master, but that's a completely different story. But if I lose my credibility if I don't host the games that I say I'm going to host. That's why every Saturday I am on here for the NycosRPG experiment, even though players have yet to start showing. That's okay. I'm there, and as my grandfather used to say, when you are at an event and you look around, the only people that are there are the important ones, and if it's you, that's just you. So, all right. So the first thing is make sure you hold. Make sure you host. So the second step, no, not second. Second. The second step to a better session is be present. And that, I know that sounds silly, because of course if you are going to host the event and you're going to be there, as I said, to host it, then you're there, right? And no. The idea of being present is to make sure that you are ready to rock and roll. You've got the entire adventure in your head. You've got an idea of what the framing is going to be. You have the transitions ready to go. You know which villains there are going to be. You've got all the numbers that you need to get to at your fingertips, if not already in your brain. But that level of preparedness makes for a better session, because you can't be tripped up. You can't be caught flat-footed. If you come to a game session and you're not that ready, then you better get ready immediately. I mean, because a player is investing time with you to participate. Pardon me. This has got to be funny for you guys to watch me almost sneeze. Should make an entire video just that. Very funny stuff. But being present means that you are ready to go. Players have a question, you have an answer. We're moving. We're progressing through the story. Okay. I think I'm going to make a sneeze and an evil monster. I'm going to put the sneeze impulse. Okay, there. Got it out. Caught the damn thing. Yes, grabbing a sneeze is very important. Okay, so the second thing is to be in the scene. You've got to be there, and you've got to be on time, and you've got to be ready. And those two things are great, but the third is the most important of the three. The third step to having better sessions is to describe the events and the conditions and the setting as if you are speaking with a person who does not have the senses that you have. That sounds silly. Of course, the majority of my players are sighted. I have a couple that have vision problems, but I don't at this moment have anybody who is vision impaired completely. I have people who have hearing difficulties, but I don't have anybody that's completely deaf, although I have had in the past. And I can't tell you how important it is to describe what you hear to a person that can't, because they can pick up on so much that a hearing person wouldn't. And it's just so dynamic to watch. So know that you're describing basically describing a visionary sight to the blind. You are describing it in ways that they are experiencing it tangibly and viscerally. It's in their comprehension, because you're describing it with the senses that they have, and therefore by using the senses that they have, you're going to be expanding their experience by giving them more than they would normally have experienced. So seeing that your villain is in the same room is one thing, but to see your villain sweating nervously and mopping his brow because there's something that's really bothering him, and you can almost smell his body odor because he's been worried like this for a time period, and the shifty way in which he's adjusting his body positioning, almost like he's ready to check out of the room, gives a feeling for what is going on in the mind of the other person. And nuances and elements of discussion that border on more than one sense are dynamically powerful. And to make your sessions better, just describe them as if your audience doesn't have the senses that you have to comprehend them. And this will make your sessions better moment by moment, because they will feel the intent and impact of what is in the room, because it will mean everything. I remember one of the most enjoyable scenarios I ever had was describing to someone that they saw a shadow across a doorway that they were within and were concerned, and they asked if they heard anything, and I said, yes, you're hearing long claws scrape against stone. Well, it was a badger crawling across a rock, but in the way I described it, they immediately imagined that it was some great feral monstrous beast coming in to devour them, and their reaction was absolutely appropriately charming and downright silly as they came face to face with the badger. But that just a way of experiencing that will make your game sessions better. So to reiterate, the three are: host every time you say you're going to, be there at the beginning and be there through it all. Number two, be present in that moment. Make sure that you are expressing the things that you are intending to express, and you're not wasting anybody's time. And then number three, make sure you describe it as if the persons you are describing it to don't have the senses that you have when you're describing them. So there you go, 3 steps to better sessions. Alrighty. Now, as usual, I'm going to take about a minute here to get lined up and wound up for my rant. 7 signs of a poor sport. This has become an issue simply because so many people are coming to roleplay games from a much more win, lose, or draw mentality, that the engagement is being done at a level that doesn't require personal investment, and therefore they're acting as if their persona, their character, is just a 2-dimensional cutout that they're placing in front of them, and missing the point of a role-play gaming altogether. But okay, so this is going to be fast because the 7 signs are rather extensive, and I'm probably going to either run out of time before I get to all 7, or whip through them so fast that you won't catch all of them. So we'll go with them really quickly. The first sign of a poor sport is he is keeping score. That does not mean that a person should not keep score when they're playing a game. It does mean, however, if a person is looking at the scoreboard as the game is going on and intent on tracking the absolute success or fail on a minute-by-minute basis, they are losing the appreciation of the game they're playing. So the first sign of a poor sport is someone who's keeping track of score. Now, that again doesn't exclude somebody from being able to know where they are in reference to winning or losing. It simply means they shouldn't be focusing so heavily on their relative position and in particular, early in the game. There's a famous country western song by Kenny Rogers. He says, "You got to know when to hold 'em and know when to fold 'em. You got to know when to walk away and you got to know when to run, but you never count your money while you're sitting at the table." And that's the line I'm speaking about here. Don't be counting your money while you're sitting at the table. Don't be looking at how much you've taken advantage of other people for to get to where you are. Do not be tracking the number of band banams. This is number 2. You should not be counting the band banams in life. Although they are fun, there is a moment of revelry that occurs when your opponent has a bad turn of events. But don't be gloating in that moment, because in that moment is when your own fall will come. The very concept of a haughty spirit goeth before a fall is referring to that as if you are going to be depending on your opponent's bad coincidences or bad situations for your own happiness, you again are missing the point. And if you are doing this, you are being a poor sport. It is unsportsmanlike to relish in the misfortune of others. Now, we all do it. It's called Schadenfreude. It is called Band Banam. It is that weird experience where we know that we are advancing because somebody else is falling behind. But this is not the time or the place for that to happen. Yes, relishing in the Band Banam after the fact to say, gosh, if that hadn't happened, I might not have won, is a positive way to look at it, but you don't do that at the moment. Don't focus on the Band Banam. Don't focus on the Schadenfreude. Don't focus on something bad happening to your opponent. That's bad sportsmanship. All right, third thing that's a sign of a poor sport is the absolute need to cheat. If the game that you are playing is too risky, then play a different game. If the game you are playing doesn't give you enough of a charge of experience playing it, then play a different game. Do not decide to break a system simply to get an advantage. This is a cardinal rule for gameplay, but in particular, it is a very bad sign of a poor sport when you have to and are compelled to, by your actions, cheat. Because cheating itself is a deprivation of the fun of an environment. And so don't do it. Number 4 sign of a poor sport is a trail of bodies of the people with whom you have played but that you don't play anymore. And this one is a two-edged sword, because I can tell you there are, in my 50 years of being a storyteller, I'm just going to start saying that because I'm 63, I'm moving to 64 this year, and therefore I'm crossing the threshold to where the 49 years I've played becomes 50. So I'm just going to say 50. But the problem here is that when you are... I lost my train of thought. So quickly going over, the first sign of bad behavior is keep score. Second thing that's bad about it is don't track the band banams. Third thing that is bad about it is see, this is why I don't take notes, because if I don't take notes, I can pontificate and I'll eventually get to all 7 of them. So let's just kind of go over them again. We're going to call number 1 the need to keep score, because keeping score is a bad thing. You don't need to do it. Number 2 is you don't count the times that somebody else had bad luck and track those. That's Bam Banam. Do not track the Bam Banam. The third thing you don't want to do is cheat. We do not want to feel compelled to break the rules in order to get an advantage, because that is no advantage at all. And it's really a sign of a poor sport when you simply can't get through a game without having to find ways to break the system. Number 4 was, I just almost got to it again. Number 4 is don't, why do I always get to number 4 and do this? All right, I'm not going to anymore. I'm going to get it right this time. Of course, we could be here for another hour, but first point of the rant, don't keep score in the game. Don't be looking at where you are compared to your opponent at any moment during the game. Afterwards, sure, you can go back and look at it and say, yes, I won because of these things, or I might have won if I had done these things, or you clearly won because you did these things. That's fine, but don't do it during the game. It's poor sportsmanship to be busy looking at the scoreboard because you're not actually playing and experiencing the game. Number 2, do not keep track of the banbanam. Do not keep track of the times when another person has a misfortune. If you do that, you are going to be perceived as a poor sport because you are glorying in somebody else's misfortune. And although that is our human nature and it is Schadenfreude, it is this the word banbanam that I use a lot. It is a part of who we are, but do not in the game focus upon it because that is a sign of a poor sport. Third thing is don't feel the need to cheat. Do not feel the need to break the system because in breaking the system, you are denying yourself some of the entertainment of the rise and fall, the success and failure mechanism. Number 4 is don't miss the forest for the trees. Don't look for the victory beyond the specific success that made it. Do not think of terms of if I beat this monster in this number of rounds, then I'm a better winner than if it took me 10 rounds to do so. And the necessity of being a expeditious winner is also a sign of a poor sport because a poor sport can't wait till the game is over. He's really not in it to win. He's only in it to win it. He's not in it to play it, and that's problematic. The next is don't come into the game with a story of your own that will have a win condition that the story doesn't support or that misuses the story elements. And this one got me in trouble in one of my very first videos in that I got a commentary back about how narcissistic I was because I admit that I, as a director of a game, guide and direct my players to reach out and achieve certain accomplishments. But a person who was tracking the course of the adventure was actually looking for places where they could leverage the game story so it would become their game story instead of the collective's game story, and I was castigating them for that. And so in the same fashion, if you are playing the game and you're playing with your own set of rules instead of the rules as established by the game mechanism itself, you're doing a disservice to the game. And I say that specifically even as I wrote my own RPG mechanisms, specifically because the tabletop RPG tools were inadequate. But hang on a second. Hey Scott, this is Jonathan.
Hey.
Funny you should call me. I'm in the middle of my broadcast.
Oh, sorry.
Now that's okay. You're here now. You have to stay, so you have to endure hearing the rest of it. So, I'll introduce you here in a moment, but I'm right in the middle of my rant, so you might be.
Oh God! I broke your momentum.
You didn't break my rant. No, you can't break it. You can't break it. It's
Okay.
It's set in iron. As a matter of fact, I've been wrestling with it, and I haven't had somebody to play foil for me. So thank you for being here. You are on the air on NycosRPG, the Game Master Soapbox. So Scott here is the person of which I have spoken several times already during the streams. You guys know that he has, unfortunately, the physical condition of being a paraplegic, and he is also an avid game master and storyteller and one of my best friends in the world. So with all of that said, Scott, just sit back and shut up now for a little bit if you don't mind, because I want to get the rest of this rant out. So we're talking about my rant being the 7 signs of a poor sport. And when I get done, if you don't mind, I will ask you, Scott, to verify or deny what I hold as the 7 signs of a poor sport. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So here we go. First sign of a poor sport is that they keep score during the game. They are busy looking at the scoreboard and their relative position and either lording it over their opponent or squawking about how they're behind. So that's the first sign of a poor sport. Second sign of a poor sport is that they have to cheat. They have a compulsion that requires them to win at all costs, and therefore if you have the desire or the need to pull fast ones to win, you're depriving yourself of the joy of actually winning. And so that is the second of the signs of a poor sport. The third sign of a poor sport, and I was up to 4, so I'm having to rewind here, so it's okay. The third sign of a poor sport, which had been the second sign of a poor sport. I should write these down. The third sign of a poor sport is don't glory in the bam-banam of others. In other words, when a situation goes poorly, they roll a bad roll, they move the wrong direction, they forgot a card they had in their hand. If they are having a moment of misfortune, do not glory in that, because in glorying that you bring down your own value in the conversation, and you also are ultimately counting coup or counting the score, the bam-banam as something useful. And the bam-banam is something that we do. We all have schadenfreude. We all have those moments where we feel a bit of joy when somebody else makes a mistake or has a bad day, but we don't reach out for it and track it. We don't hold onto it and glory in it. It's just a nature of things. So that's the third one. Do not glory in somebody else's bad fortune. Fourth thing that that is a sign of a poor sport is do not do a hierarchical comparison of yourself with others in the game. It's akin to scorekeeping, but more importantly, it's the idea of, am I ahead or behind of this person or that person? And that's a dangerous thing to do in a game session, because if it's a role-playing game system, there is no hierarchy, and tracking whether or not you've made 3 successes and they've only made 2 is really petty and doesn't really play into it, because in the global scheme of things, it's whether you win or lose. It is not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game that matters. And that's where I was going. That was my fifth one. Fifth one is, do not hold to the adage that it's not whether you win or lose, but do not go to the opposite. Do not say it's more important to win or lose than to know how you played the game. Because when you are using a victory by any means mentality, you are obviously cutting off the nose to spite your face, because a collaborative win is in many ways subjectively better than an individual win. It's the concept of playing as a pro at your sport as compared to being a pro team player as a sport. Because if you are playing as a team, the victory matters only because we all won. If you're trying to do it only because you were a better player, you are missing the point and depriving yourself of the joy of the entire team winning. So number 6 on the 7 deadly signs of a poor sport is the self-congratulation, the instantaneous joy of a success in a string of luck. In other words, if you are rolling dice on a combat chart, and when you roll a 20, you jump up and down and fist bump and act all crazy. But if you roll a nominal victory, you just kind of shine it. You're missing the point. A success is a success. A partial is a success. So don't glory in your high points, because ultimately, if you do, the low points will come back and bite you. I can't tell you how many players I've had in a game that roll a natural 20 and then they exalt over it, and the very next die roll is a natural 1. So do not look at your individual successes as a measure of your being, because that's really a poor sport. And finally, the biggest one, and this is actually one that was in the news recently, the worst sign of being a poor sport is not being able to congratulate a winner. If you lose, if you have a negative and you are in a bad situation, smile, appreciate the opportunity to play, congratulate the winner for a superior playthrough, and move on. It's okay. The idea that I must win, and if I don't win, there's something wrong with the contest, is to, again, deprive yourself of the highs and lows of life. But more importantly, you're showing yourself to be a disrespectful person and an unworthy one. Scott, I don't know if you saw in the news the other day, but there was 2 news stories that happened back to back. One was a wrestler who was wrestling in his weight class and was outperformed. He actually just got beat. The guy just clearly defeated him. And when the guy got up to shake hands, he punched the guy in the face. The loser punched the winner in the face. It's like, no, you should be ejected from the sport. You should have to go home and tell your mama what you did. That's horrible. That's horrible. And the other one was likened unto, there was a young lady who was playing on a basketball team, and their basketball team, arguably there might have been some bad calls in the game. I'm not a sports guy, so I really don't know. But the issue is that when they got in line and they were walking past each player, and you're supposed to bump fists or shake hands or whatever, she clocked the other girl and took her down. And it's ridiculous. It's stupid. It's demeaning. It's embarrassing, and it just shouldn't happen. So these 7 things are absolutely reasons why being a poor sport should be lifted off of your agenda. Do not do these 7 things, and life will be a lot better. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Is that okay, Scott, if I get off my soapbox? How do you feel about my 7 points of poor sportsmanship?
I agree with most of them. I think the only one I stick at was, can't remember whether it's 2 or 3 that I questioned. I couldn't see how it applied to role play, but.
Oh, the keeping score?
No, keeping score was the first one, and.
Okay, so you totally agree with keeping a score. Keep score is a stupid thing to do during the game, because if you're looking at the scoreboard and you're not playing the game, right? You're busy focusing on the wrong thing. Second one was the need to cheat.
Well, okay, it wasn't 2, because the need to cheat does exist, and in a role-playing scenario, that's one thing I don't see.
Right. You don't see people doing it? I see people doing it all the time.
No, I'm saying I see people doing it.
You don't see the appeal. You don't
see the appeal. It doesn't
Scott, that's only because you're an honorable person and you're fun to play games with because of it. So, okay. So the third was Ban Banam.
Okay. This is probably the one I questioned, but that just comes down to, I don't realize what you mean when you say Ban Banam. This is
okay. So it's a Melanesian word. Which means it's from a foreign language that is not English, obviously. The Melanesian word refers to an event that causes distress to another, but joy for yourself. The idea of you're in a turn, the guy's going to cut you off, he slips a lane and gets into a fender bender.
and you go, yeah, you deserve that. That's Bam Banam.
Yeah.
That has no place in a role playing game. If Scott, if you're rolling for a dexterity check and you fail the dexterity check, I shouldn't fist pump and say, yeah, now you get hit by the monster. That's right, you deserve that.
No, I mean, it is a consequence of failing the dexterity check or whatever, but yeah, you shouldn't glorify that.
Right.
That
Ban Ban Banam is the closest translation that I could find. The second closest is even worse. It's a German word called Schadenfreude.
I know what Schadenfreude is, but I thought that was just like an indulgent ego.
No, Schadenfreude is the same exact experience. It's the
Okay.
I get a good stroke because something bad happened to you.
Yeah.
That's what a Schadenfreude incident is. Let's see the fourth one, because now I think we may have passed the one that you were having a boggle with. Pecking order.
Well,
Instantaneous pecking order. I don't have as much as that person over there, but I've got more than this person over here.
that does happen in our groups, but like.
But my point is that the person that is taking that position, who's measuring, it's like the old comment about dick measuring. You know, you're pulling out a ruler and you're comparing two things that are private and don't matter anyway. You know, what are you doing? It's literally not to throw our dear Gene under the bus, but it's the I don't have any magic items. I've never had any magic items. No one ever gives me any magic items.
I knew where you were going because he still does that, and
And to me, it's the only sign of a poor sport I see in her. As far as playing games with her, she's great, but when it comes to that one point, she just can't be okay with her condition, and it's just annoying. And I know it actually is a reflection on the game masters she's played with before, and they either lavish her with free stuff all the time, which is one bad thing. Monty Hall is a subject we're going to have in one of these days, but that was the next one. So maybe that was the one that you were kind
and maybe that's the one I'd still see when playing in Nycos.
Yeah, well, you're gonna see it whenever you play with somebody who has these signs of a poor sport. You've seen the other ones we've talked about in games with me. I know you have.
Yes.
You've seen people who can't help but cheat. You've seen people that keep score constantly. Play by your own rules. That was the other one. Play by your own rules. If you came into my game and you're going to play by your own rules, then it's not my game you want to be in. You should be running your own. Matter of fact, that was one of my rants the other day. Was that very thing? Is if you were coming in to change the storyline, then maybe you should be a storyteller yourself.
Well, okay. I am gonna kind of like have a counterpoint at this on this point in particular, because isn't that what everybody ultimately wants? Well, maybe not everybody, because there are some people that don't have the drive to be a storyteller, but I feel like that's every player's like end goal.
No, I can point to people we've had in our games that don't have that. Steven never had that. Matt didn't have that. Matt was good at being able to roll with the punches of whatever came, but he was not someone who brought in an anvil and said, "I'm going to hammer out the problems." It's like Egon Spengler. You know, I used to have a piece of a slinky. I straightened it. It's like, no. If you straighten it, it's not a slinky anymore. So you can't even say it's part of a slinky if you didn't keep it curved, because the curve is the slinky.
Yeah.
So when you come into my game and you're going to bring out your hammer and your anvil and you're going to straighten my slinky, that sounds painful. Actually, I probably shouldn't say that. Someone's going to hear that wrong. Oh man. So There we go. So now you actually got here right at the perfect time, because I came to the actual point of this entire show was to come down to something that is not game related, but something I think that needs to be said. And that is that there is a real secret to happiness. And we as human beings have for decades and centuries walked right past it. Many of you today still do. And so what I want to share with you over the next few seconds, and it might take me a minute, but I doubt it. The real secret to happiness is to start with happiness. And that sounds really weird, but one of the things my own father did is that every morning he would wake up and you could hear him singing throughout the house. He wasn't very good, and as my great-grandfather would say, he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket with both hands. The emphasis was that he was giving it his all. At the top of his lungs, he was singing. And his reason for doing that was simply this. If we come into the world with the idea of happiness inside of us as a possibility, then the evidence of happiness will manifest itself in some fashion for some part of every day. So if you learn to bring happiness out, show it off, show the world what it looks like, then the world will respond by bringing you happiness. I have to say that I've been a writer and a novelist since 2014 when I left working. No, 2014 when I left working for Konami. And I have never been happier in my life. I've had problems. I can tell you, Scott can verify that I had a downtime when I had my attack of Bell's palsy. I had a heck of a time when my storage unit burned down and I lost 750 board games in all 5 of my 40K armies. I had a particularly bad time when my dad passed away and then found out that my sister had passed away before him, but her family wouldn't tell me. I've had, in 1987, I had a daughter die in a car accident. I think I've got a corner on bad in life. But I can tell you that my real happiness started when I took this secret to heart. And so I don't wake up any day of life anymore with anything but happiness, because I bring it and I'm sharing it with the world right now. So if you're not a happy person, there's a song for you. It's called Get Happy. I believe it's the Monkees. I have to go look for it. It's a great song.
Yes.
But
Monkey.
it is Monkees. Good. So the point is that you bring the happy to the party. And if you want every day to be as enjoyable as my life is, you got to go dig out your happiness, put it on display. Now, I know there are going to be people that say, Jonathan, there is such a thing as clinical depression. There is such a thing as bad times that overcome us. And I totally agree. But our choice, there's a young lady, I don't know, Scott, have I told you the story about Nightbird?
Nightbird. I don't think.
She was on America's Got Talent, and she was a singer, and she was 22 years old. And she was standing in front of them and smiling, and just a very charming young lady. And they asked her, what brought her to the show. And she says, well, I have stage 4 terminal cancer, and it has spread through all of my body, and I probably won't last a year.
Jeez.
And when she said that, the entire audience went to a hush. And Simon Cowell, the curmudgeon on the show, was almost in tears. And he says, how can you do this? How can you stand up here? How can you do this? And she said, you can't wait for things to go right before you choose to be happy.
Yes.
And just saying that means even in the worst of life, even when things are horrible, even when things are not going right, you are still vertical. You're still in this world. You still have a dog in the fight. So by golly, have a good time and enjoy the life that we have, because it is the only one we're getting. All right. Now, I get off my soapbox now. So thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope some of the stuff I shared with you is useful. I think this may have been one of my most productive shows because I actually got through my rant with Scott's help. I don't think I would have made it without him. So thank you, Scott, for showing up. This is Scott Crandall, everybody. Let's hear a round of applause for Scott. Yay! All right, there we go. So thank you, everybody. If you like what you're seeing, make sure you follow this video on Twitch. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you can. Definitely, if you're seeing this on YouTube, subscribe because it doesn't cost you a penny and it helps the algorithm know that people are interested in the kind of stuff that I'm sharing. And if you can, why don't you share it with your friends, especially if you got people in your life that are guilty of some of the 7 signs of a poor sport. Maybe you need them to be aware of it. Maybe you want to share the 3 steps of a better session. This episode is here for everybody, and I'm just excited to have been here. And thank you very, very much to Scott for being here. Also to our sponsor, Board Game Paradise. Their logo is down here in the corner. Not that I'm repeating myself or anything, but I want to make sure that there you go. There we go. And thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you later. Get my...
No.
There you go. Bye.
Bye.
Say bye, Scott.
Bye, everybody.